Buying an apartment could be one of the biggest purchases you ever make, but according to experts who have been researching the industry closely, the majority of apartment blocks built across Australia in the last 20 years are likely to have some kind of defect. A landmark study published this year found that 97% of buildings reviewed in New South Wales had at least one defect. That figure is 74% in Victoria and 71% in Queensland.
It's systemic and it's infecting lots of buildings across the landscape in all parts of the country. It's very clear and it's very prominent, and we've got a serious problem here.
What we're seeing is the outcomes from a poorly oversighted industry with lack of competence and in some cases a lack of integrity. Commercial imperatives have really overtaken public interest in terms of decisions that have been made.
When you're doing something very complicated, like building a high-rise apartment building, there are going to be things which need to get fixed up.
So how do we get into this mess? It starts right at the beginning with the lure of a big-name architect.
They have to get the sales off the plan straight away. Once they've got the pre-sales and the bank then allows the money to flow, they then cut the name architect and then go to an unregistered design, unregistered architect or draftsman just to map out the basics to go to tender. That's the start of the defects.
It's called the design and construct model.
The builder, who has no training in design by the way, now takes responsibility for the design done to date and completing the last half of the detail. Now he's doing that on a tight budget, and so what frequently happens is he gets the subcontractor to finish the designs the way they see fit. The subcontractor doesn't have time to complete that design, and so he gets his tradies to turn up on the job to finish the design off on the go. That's the design and construct model that's operating in most of these high-rise buildings and is at the heart of the problems that we see today.
And then there's the products being used.
So they go away and they start to develop the design and they start to need to find ways to keep the costs down so they can achieve those margins. So that will involve things like product substitution, shifting the design to different, cheaper ways of building. There's also lots of examples where products are substituted without any approval, without the knowledge of the owner who thought they were getting a different product.
The non-conforming building product issue has become more of a problem as the global, as it's become easier to purchase globally. So the ease with which you can go online and purchase things from overseas, that you can get them online, you can order container loads. It's an endemic issue throughout the building supply chain, and it's a largely unrecognised issue.
The question is, why haven't these problems been picked up? Apartment building used to be overseen by government, but since the 90s it's been outsourced.
Well, essentially the private certifier is engaged and paid for by the owner, developer, builder, whichever arrangement is existing. And that means then that the next job is also coming from the owner, the developer or the builder. So where the builder is building multiple properties, they're going to have a preference for a particular surveyor. And that might well be because of the service that the surveyor offers, but on the other hand, they might also prefer a surveyor that is going to be the path of least resistance when they want to get something approved.
40 years ago or more, there was a system called a clerk of works, whereby you had a very experienced individual who was hired to represent the future owners, and they would come onto site every day and inspect the works. And they had the authority to stop the works or push over a brick wall if it was wrong. And everybody then lay in fear of this person because they had to sign off the final project.
Certifiers don't have to check all safety devices. In New South Wales, for example, only a small fraction of fire dampers needs to be looked at.
In a building of this size, what are we, 5-6 levels, there could literally be hundreds and hundreds of fire dampers penetrating the walls. So
and you're only required to check one
per floor. One per floor.
That seems crazy.
If I have 300, I check one, 299 escape our look. So Sean, what we're looking at here is an apartment bathroom, an ensuite under construction.
It's the same for waterproofing.
we're required to look at, certifiers in New South Wales, we're required to look at 10% only per floor. 100 bathrooms, 10 bathrooms only we're required to look at. But when we come out, we're looking at a membrane on a floor. We have no knowledge of how many coats have gone down, we've got no knowledge of how it was installed, and we've certainly got no knowledge of what happens to that floor after we walk away from the site.
Tradespeople review their own work and supply a certificate to say the job is done properly.
None of that paperwork carries any legal recognition. They're not legal documents. In some instances, they could be written on a beer coaster because they carry no recognition in the statutory process. The only one document that carries the legal recognition is our occupation certificate. If something was to fail or go wrong down the track, it's the occupation certificate that's brought to the table. And it's the issuance or the author of the occupation certificate who is in the firing line.
And that's you.
And that's me.
Now, you might think people working on a building site need to be officially accredited, but in some states they don't.
Trouble at the moment is almost anybody in Australia can claim to be an engineer. Other than in Queensland, where there's been a registration system in place since 1930, in other states and jurisdictions, there is no restriction on anybody claiming to be an engineer. We regard that as being unacceptable, and I think the community regards this being unacceptable.
So in part it's about accountability. So we know who it is that is able to do this work. We can give them the licence to operate and to earn a living, but we can also take it from them if they're not behaving. So it provides a level of accountability.
So what happens if you find a fault in your apartment building? Unfortunately, there are very few consumer protections. If your building is over 3 stories, your builder doesn't have to take out insurance to protect you from faults or unfinished work.
We've got no homeowners warranty insurance above 3 stories. You've got no homeowners warranty insurance, so you've got no fallback position, which we had years ago.
That leaves you with only one option: legal action against the developer or builder. But depending on where you live, you'll have as few as 5 years to sue for structural defects and 2 for non-structural flaws.
If people are not prepared for that kind of financial burden, they can find it really devastating. And I see it with almost all of my clients coming to me and asking, well, what do we do now? And unfortunately, they all have to spend more money on more expert reports, more legal fees, before they can even get the builder in a room to start talking about what they might cover. And generally, they're always somewhat out of pocket, even if they do recover part of it from the builder.
If by now you're wondering how to avoid buying a problem apartment, help is at hand. The ABC has published an article with tips from industry experts. You can find it at the link below.